Now it's time for our final presentation of the conference by Dr Jackie Curtis, who's the recipient of this year's Margaret Tobin Award. Dr Curtis is the Executive Director of the Mindgardens Neuroscience Network and Clinical Lead of Youth Mental Health, South Eastern Sydney Local Health District. Jackie is a conjoint professor with the discipline of psychiatry and mental health at UNSW and has a long-standing interest in the physical health of people living with psychosis. Her clinical research has had strong translational implications, influencing service delivery and clinical practice. She's co-founded the international group concerned with physical health in young people experiencing psychosis in 2010, which she co-chairs. So please welcome Dr Jackie Curtis.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and good morning, still morning to everybody. Kaya, kia ora. And I would like to start by acknowledging the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and the traditional custodians on the land that we're meeting on today. And for those of you online, for acknowledging the people that your land is on at the moment. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge any First Nations people here today. Additionally, I want to recognise the significant contribution of people with lived experience and living experience of mental health issues and their families and those who care for them. It is incredibly humbling to be here today to receive the Margaret Tobin Award, and I do want to have a shout out to Grant Sarah, who nominated me for this award. Margaret was an uncompromising champion for patients in the public mental health system and achieved so much with consumers on their behalf. I'm deeply moved and honoured to receive this award in her name. When I learnt of the award, I must say I was also surprised because the award is for an administrative psychiatry, and I've never thought of myself as an administrative psychiatrist. I've been a clinician first and foremost, and the system changes that I've been able to achieve through the work with my team have all come from a single motivation, and that is to get a better deal for people who use our mental health services. Today, I'm going to share some of the history of the work that I've done in collaboration with my teams, and the work in particular around the physical health of people living with mental illness, with psychosis in particular, because I think it tells the story of how psychiatrists can advocate for positive change and make this change sustainable. Hoping through some slides, and here's some photo of the Bondi, wonderful Bondi Sculpture by the Sea exhibition, and I'd urge those who have never seen it to come to Sydney especially for that. But it's really my view and my perspective on what I've seen over these years about how a quality improvement exercise that we started in a suburban clinic in Bondi ignited into an international movement that has immensely positively impacted service delivery. But the best part that I'm going to be able to share with you today is introducing you to some of the wonderful colleagues and supporters who've joined us along the way. There are few better feelings than collaborating with people who really get it and bring different skills to the services and to the people that the service reform is for. Many of you will maybe, hopefully, familiar with the Keeping the Body and Mind program or the iphYs movement, if for those of you in youth mental health, or equally well, the national initiative. And each of those movements really have got their own momentum nowadays. But back then, when I started this work more than 2 decades ago, there was no signposts. It really wasn't clear what there was to do, and so it's easy at the moment to view it as a journey. You'll see a whole lot of work and think, well, this was done in an orderly fashion from one thing to the next, but the truth is much different and less inevitable, much messier. When we had no signposts, as I say, and there was minimal interest from our psychiatry colleagues or the specialists in physical health disciplines to actually address this topic. So I'd just like to share some of the journey. And also, before moving on to that, I've often used this slide as destiny in terms of thinking about the course for people living with mental illness. Is it necessary that they're going to end up with cardiovascular morbidity and a shortened life? But I'm actually using it differently today, having been at the college ceremony and actually watching the enthusiasm of the new graduates, the trainees, the pathway that we all are on at that stage. I just really want to think about and reflect back on what I thought at that stage when I was a trainee coming into psychiatry. I certainly did not think that I was going to be up here giving the Margaret Tobin Oration. So I just like to just share how some of that sort of journey began and continued on, and also give hope for those of you who are at the earlier stages of your career too, to think about the different doors and opportunities that can arise that you may not have ever expected. So hopefully you are all absolutely aware of this issue, which has been described in various ways, the 15 to 20 year shortened life of people living with serious mental illness. The lethal discrimination is one way it's been described. Graham Thornycroft called it the scandal of premature mortality. Those were in 2011 for Graham Thornycroft, and the UK Rethink document was 2013. So that's certainly how we think of it today. We know that most people who die prematurely who live with severe mental illness die from cardiovascular disease, 2/3 of people, as opposed to suicide, which is still significant and important, but much more commonly people die of cardiovascular mortality, which is clearly unacceptable. But I'd like to describe it in a different way to maybe help understand it a bit better. So I'm just showing you a photograph of a family. This was taken in Europe, pre-World War II. 3 children. All 3 of these children went on to marry. They all married in their 20s. They each had a son and a daughter. All 3 had significant cardiovascular disease, as did their father. They had premature cardiovascular disease. One developed schizophrenia in her late 20s. 2 of the siblings lived till their 80s, receiving very good medical care. One died at the age of 62 from physical health comorbidities that were not treated. More on the family and the impact of schizophrenia later, but that's just setting the scene. So let me take you back about 22 years. I was a junior consultant, and a very wonderful opportunity arose. I came back from maternity leave, and Mary Ann O'Donnell, who was my wonderful friend, consultant now, and mentor, then invited me to go and work in the early psychosis program. Now, I hadn't thought of doing that. I was busy with the second child and thinking I'll come back to work part-time, but she offered me this opportunity. I'd not had a life dream to do that. When I got there, it was absolutely something that I was passionate about and felt that this was a space that I wanted to be in. And I also, at that time, I was watching young people through that clinical work put on significant weight in front of my eyes, and we really didn't even know how to quantify this. We had these debates about which medications put on more weight, but we really didn't have a way of looking at it. We had one scale in the whole building, and we had one blood pressure cuff at that stage from multiple doctors, and certainly no charts to monitor anything on. Around the same time, I went to a talk, it was 2002, with David Henderson, who's a professor of psychiatry. I knew him for his work at that stage on refugee and trauma work. He was from Harvard, and but this occasion was coming to talk about something quite different. He was talking about weight gain and diabetes in people who were taking anti-psychotic medications. I had no understanding before that day that second-generation antipsychotic medications could lead to such a rapid onset of diabetes and diabetic ketoacidosis, which, as you hopefully know, can be a deadly state. And really that changed a whole lot of things, those 2 facts. David suggested in his talk by listing the things that we should be measuring, but there was no mechanism to do that, and the topic was completely unknown at that point. So I did a literature review at that stage for our journal club in our early psychosis program, and it came up with 4 papers. Did a presentation, some of you old enough to remember, slide projectors, handwritten on perspex and changing over, so much easier nowadays, but still. I still have that presentation, 4 papers in the literature on this topic, not about early psychosis, but about diabetes and weight gain. If you did the same search now, there'd be tens of thousands of papers, thankfully, but that was 2002. Basically, after that, the debate ensued about what should we do about this? Can we do something about it? And that's really how it all began. To set the context, my children at that time were young, so I was very busy focused on being a mum. I worked 12 hours a week, and I'm trying to give you a flavour of the focus at that time, my kids, a little bit of this work, and then where it's taken, and you'll hopefully see the journey of each. Eventually, and this is eventually through that period I found time with the team to actually develop a metabolic monitoring chart. Now these are the fancier versions, but the original version was done in a Word document by our wonderful front desk assistant, just in a very simple, here's what we think we should measure based on David Henderson's talk and a little bit of the literature review. We basically got all of the we photocopied them, make sure that every person in the early psychosis program would get monitored, but we weren't allowed to use that form, of course, because the forms committee hadn't actually allowed it, so we had to go through. It took us a year, really, to get the process of the form sorted, and then it got modified. This is a later version, and finally on the right-hand side is actually when it became a statewide form. But first of all, it was a local form for the Bondi Clinic for our consumers, and then the district took it on and said, well, this is of interest, and then statewide, and now I can say of late it's a electronic medical form as well. But that's going very fast forward, and really it began with an idea and a talk. So really my message here is that the development was accidental but also deliberate. It was an accident that we stumbled on something that turned out to be critically important, but it was deliberate in that the guiding principle never changed. We were deeply focused on the experience of our patients and unwilling to accept compromised physical health as just an unfortunate outcome of their mental health treatment. And now I'd like to introduce my wonderful colleague, Philip Ward, and friend. Phil is an exceptional research leader, a research mentor to many. And I'm not certainly at that stage I wasn't a researcher, still don't have a PhD. And Phil suggested a way forward to trying to address this gap of understanding and our passionate interest in it. And he helped with the assistance of our awesome occupational therapist that he'd brought in, Megan Still, who was on maternity leave and came and did this little project. And with a small group of us, including Megan Calusi, who's here today, we gathered in Megan's home and thought, what should we be doing? And we did a retrospective file audit of the patients in our early psychosis service. It won't surprise you to know that we found very little. And that's the point. By demonstrating that almost none of our clients were having their blood lipids taken, we could make a case for better surveillance of those measures. It was a small quality improvement research project. It didn't win any prizes and it was never published, but it was enough to get us a poster at the Early Psychosis 2006 meeting. And Megan will remember helping us to write the abstract for this presentation. And there's a long time ago, our first outing with doing an abstract for the physical health work that we had done. From this experience, I've learnt for the first time the power of regular day-to-day medical records in demonstrating incrementally what is actually happening and making a case for change. I've come to think that all clinicians should somehow be involved in research of some kind or quality improvement activity. It's part of that intellectual curiosity. It's driven not by the desire to publish paper and publish papers and get grants. It's actually what can we do to make patient care better? And I've learnt that actually trying to do that with evidence has really helped the cause. So by standing up and talking about the topics in the past, once I'd published papers, people took me more seriously, even if I was saying the same thing. So it's just a lesson on process, but I certainly had the collaboration and cooperation of my colleagues to make this possible to do this, not on my own, because I didn't know how to do all the steps. I remember Megan showing me how to write my first abstract, which I'd never done in my life at that stage, and Phil talking us through the steps along the way of the actual data collection and later publication. And now, we're 2006, and we have Andrew Watkins, and who hopefully is online. Hi, Andrew, and Kath Henry, both of whom were the early psychosis nurses working on the early psychosis team at that time. Both Andrew and Kath decided to sign themselves up for a diabetes educator course, and they came back super enthused about let's do something to keep going with this process. And we together set up a metabolic monitoring clinic, and so I'd see the young person as part of the routine clinical care as a psychiatrist, and they'd be on either side of the rooms, and we would make sure that everybody got measured, and then also some interventions being offered and recommended to them. This was something that was partly led by the fact that Andrew and Kath were super focused on fitness and sports themselves, but also their desire to make a change for the consumers that we were seeing. But they did this really on their own and set up groups and so on without any extra expertise from outside. It was really their drive at that time. And it couldn't have been different having it without them. So, and I can think of times when, and this is really important, that the multidisciplinary team in my mind, Andrew would come up to me and I'd be prescribing medications for consumers, and he would in our clinical review meetings challenge me to say, well, why don't we switch this person from this medication to something else? And I think that's really important, the advocacy from a whole team and the different perspectives. So I'm very grateful for that. And then came the wonderful Hannah Miles. She was Hannah Newell back then, and she was a third-year medical student. This was 2008, and again with Phil's support and really vision, he linked Hannah up with me. I'd never supervised a proper trainee doing a medical student doing an independent learning project for a year, and Hannah was my first, not my last, but certainly my most amazing, and really showed me the power, the transformative power of having an extra person full of capacity, capability, energy, boundless energy, and pushing me along to try and do more and more, and actually allowing me the space and time to create some ideas that she would be able to help share. She was also fantastic at Excel and sorted out our metabolic monitoring form, as well as did our first prevalence study of metabolic, the cross-sectional prevalence of metabolic syndrome in our population, and that was published. Now, again, Phil was there supporting us along the way and literally sat by my side through this process of publishing my first paper, which I had never intended to do, but I recognise now the importance of publications and so on in order to actually argue for service change. So, and then came our next fortunate accident, and I am thinking of destiny in these situations as I'm describing this. Oops. Simon Rosenbaum. I could have shown a photo of Simon back then when I first met him in 2010, but I might have gotten in trouble from Simon for that. But Simon was an exercise physiologist who really I had no idea actually about what an exercise physiologist was. I heard Simon talk at a top conference that I was talking at as well, and he described what exercise can do for mental health, and then I went up to talk to him straight after that and asked him if he wanted to come and work with us, and he did. He came and did his PhD with us, and really we didn't look back after that. Simon's been someone who's deeply skilled at developing accessible exercise programs for people with mental illness, and he's really been instrumental in leading the field for exercise in mental health now internationally and beyond the work that he did with us initially. So through Simon's engagement with us, the Bondi Gym was born. So through a whole long story, but we basically managed to get through a project that Simon was doing, looking at, and with Phil, looking at the hippocampal volume of our young patients to see if exercise actually expanded hippocampal volume. We organised some exercise equipment. We kind of got in trouble a little bit because we ordered the equipment, we changed the room around, and then we asked for permission from management afterwards. We were a little bit in trouble, but it was worth every bit of it. So now you can hear that we're characterising the cardiometabolic effects of second-generation antipsychotic medications and starting to develop an evidence-based response to them. It's translational research again, which I would argue is an essential part of system change. So some brief reflections before I come back to the narrative. Firstly, as psychiatrists, it seems to me we've got a particular worldview and we're not always great at collaborating across disciplines. I think we're getting better at that, but certainly that wasn't the impression when I started this work. The Keeping the Body in Mind service and all the influence it has had could never have come about without the knowledge and expertise of our diverse colleagues, nurses, psychologists, social workers, dietitians, occupational therapists, exercise physiologists and peer specialists. They've all centrally contributed to this. I'm just going to keep also describing what I think was the prevailing attitude at that time. It was really, our job as a psychiatrist was fix up the stuff in the head, and it was someone else's job, maybe GPs, maybe someone else, but not our job to worry about the body. And certainly when I was being trained, and probably still exists today, we're psychodynamically informed, we sit in chairs, there's countertransference, we shouldn't touch our patients. And whilst that is true in certain respects, actually we are doctors, and as doctors we are responsible for the medications we prescribe. And so if that includes taking someone's waist circumference and touching them, then that is actually part of our duty. It's not against that, and I think we should really make sure that we remember that when we're prescribing any medications. And we actually have the privilege of doctors, of being a doctor, and the obligation to do no harm as well. And the physical health is something that's part of our job, not just the mental health of people. And the other attitude, that you can't do it, I certainly was discouraged from trying to do anything about this problem of obesity. Look, it's too hard, that's not what we're here for, we've got to do other more important things of sorting out someone's hallucinations and delusions. And whilst those mental health symptoms are incredibly important, as are family dynamics and all of the other psychosocial pieces, actually the physical health is important too, and we can do it. And I think the attitude that I had a lot of pushback about some of the work that we've done, like, this is not our business, don't do it. So I'm going to say, let's knock out that prevailing attitude and move forward. And now I'd like to introduce you to Catherine Samaras. Catherine's an endocrinologist, a professor of endocrinology at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney and at the Garvan Institute, and really had also had an incredibly strong passion for various, I guess, priority and minority groups. She had done some pioneering work on diabetes linked to HIV treatments, and it was clear that there were important common themes. However, my contact with Cathy was really about, how can you help us? How can we work together so we can understand what the cardiometabolic issues are that we can try and sort out together? So I would really like you to help us with that. And she straight away came on board to do that. You can see her giving a TED talk on the topic. That was around the time that I'd met her as well. So it was a real privilege to actually have Cathy join us. At that stage, I'd never written a project proposal and had no idea how to ask for money or how much to request. There was an opportunity to have some registrar training funding money, so I put in for $2,000 for what was called the New South Wales Institute of Medical Education and Training, then it's now called HETI, and they liked the proposal so much that they said, no, we'll give you $8,000. So I thought that was stunning. And Beth Coetzee, who was here yesterday, I'm not sure if she's here today, she was part of, she was my boss at the time, and actually showed her this, and I was a bit scared to talk to her because she was the big boss, and I just showed her what I've been able to get and how do I do this, how do I move to the next stage. She was very helpful in navigating me through all of that time. So the idea with that funding was to actually do a 4-hour workshop with people, registrars predominantly, to help them to gain an understanding of the cardiometabolic health issues in people with mental illness. That's all it was designed to do. The extra funding was so that we could, IMET wanted us to actually just record it and put it up online and so on, so we did that. But through that funding, what we were able to do was that Kathy, Hannah and I were able to develop what is now known as the positive cardiometabolic health algorithm. It was 2010 when we first did this. You can see that the design was very simple. It was done on a Word document. It was done by my 14-year-old son at that stage. It persists to this day, but I'll show you the updated version shortly. This tool was designed for this workshop. It wasn't designed to go on to do bigger, better things. We weren't thinking we were transforming the system. We were simply trying to get the best possible outcomes for patients by pushing our resources out into a training curriculum. In retrospect, I can see this was a classic move. Demonstrate your proof of concept in a small way, and then ask incrementally for larger pieces of funding and scale it up. But at that time, I had no idea. And now I'm very, very proud to introduce my colleague David Shires from the UK. He's my buddy, my mentor. He's a GP with a retired GP, although his version of retirement. He works super hard, and he has a daughter, an adult daughter who lives with schizophrenia. When we met, David was heading up the UK's national early intervention in psychosis development program for the whole of NHS England. He'd been working in the UK on the cardiometabolic health of people with psychosis for about as long as me, but he hadn't got much traction. And in talking about David, I'd like to talk about the concept, introduce the concept of competitive altruism, which David and I invented together soon after, but initially over a bottle of red on the day that we met in Amsterdam in 2010. We were at a conference. He had a symposium on this topic, and we had this poster with our cardiometabolic health algorithm on it. He, through a series of discussions at that meeting, looked at it and decided he was going to nick it, as he said. I'm going to nick it and take it back to the UK. And I said, with my pleasure. He then took this back up to his department, and they said, yeah, let's nick it. Let's nick this Australian development, and we should have it here too. So the competitive altruism was that the UK looked at it and thought, oh God, the Aussies down under have got this. We better do something better. So they developed and adapted, and was born the well-known UK Leicester adaptation. So once that happened, and we brought this information back to Australia, I was able to juggle and say, look what they're doing in the UK, we better do something more here. And certainly this has played out multiple times in the years gone by since then. More on David and the work later, but see the iphYs logo down there, that was also born on that first meeting in Amsterdam in 2010. The idea of working across groups together to actually make a difference in a bigger scale was something that we were able to do because we'd found this common shared goal across 2 countries. And then it became bigger than that. So someone else had an enormous impact on me around this time. As a result of meeting David, I'd been able to attract a small amount of fund from New South Wales Health to hold our first iphYs meeting. So that's the International Physical Health in Youth stream, which we developed through that meeting in Amsterdam. I was developing the program, and then I got a random call out of the blue from consumer advocate Stephanie Hewitt. She asked why there was no one with lived experience on the program. Well, she asked if there was any. She hadn't seen the program as yet, and she was right. I thought it was a very good question. And based on my conversation with her, I invited Stephanie to come and talk. And she talked about her struggle with physical health side effects of treatment, consumer advocacy, and she brought the house down with that. In essence, at that meeting, what it showed me was the power of consumer voice in this change movement. It was certainly I thought I was very engaged with understanding consumers and having the perspective of trying to work with consumers. But until Stephanie came and spoke, I hadn't understood, and she has taught me so much and continues to this day to influence me and challenge me on this topic. But in essence, we were able to bring this group together and create further impetus to develop what we call the HEAL Declaration, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. But Stephanie has gone on to publish a lot on this topic in terms of consumer perspective and advocacy, and really, important to know that that's certainly influenced my thinking, but I think consumer movement in this whole space is actually very, very significant for all of us to make changes. So each of these developments and chance meetings, small and incremental individually, have coalesced into a movement that is securing real change for some of the most disadvantaged members of our community. The iphYs group went on then to have after our Sydney iphYs meeting, this was our first international iphYs meeting in San Francisco during the International Early Psychosis Association conference. And again, New South Wales Health funded us to be able to run this first workshop, and many of my colleagues who were there, some of them are on the photos, and Alan Rosen was there, and Megan Calusi again, and Andrew and Phil and Simon, but more of our team. It was very exciting to bring together so many people to help to develop the international declaration that we've then subsequently developed, called the HEAL Declaration, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. I'm sure everyone here who's entered psychiatry, they've done that because they've wanted to be a force for good, certainly at an individual level and possibly at a community level too. But looking back on the landmarks of our profession reveals that we have too often been implicated in abuses, which decent right-thinking psychiatrists at the time either did or did not recognise and did not act upon them. It is possible that when we look back at our inaction on the cardiometabolic consequences of our treatments, we will see this as another example of those abuses, and the courage of consumers like Stephanie can orient us to what we need to do. I also just, as an aside, recommend anyone who hasn't read Melissa Sweet's book about Margaret Tobin called Inside Madness to do so. It's a fantastic exploration of Margaret's life and reform, but also the history of psychiatry in Australia at least, and quite a read. And now it's my great honour to talk to you about the irreplaceable David Pearce. We lost David to cancer last year. He's gone much too soon, and I miss him terribly. David was at that time the director, or through the critical time of our work, director of mental health in the southeastern local health district where I worked, and latterly as the executive director of the mental health New South Wales. He was a steadfast champion, a visionary leader. He believed in what we were doing and supported the work that we did in a blind faith. Well, I thought it was a blind faith. He knew what he was doing, but he actually supported me personally as well as professionally through major times of bureaucratic adversity. As an administrator, David was the best, a visionary leader with a genuine commitment to consumers, and I thank David so much for everything, including for me being here today, and KBIM wouldn't have been possible without that. This is the Keeping the Body in Mind program. We're fast forwarding now to 2013, and this is where it was set up in the Bondi Centre. Really, what we did was we transformed through the group room in the front into a gym. That's when Simon came along, and that's really transformed the way and the shape of our service and what we've been able to do since then. In the next chapter, what we did was we evaluated through a large grant we got from New South Wales Health the algorithm, basically, and we did that through a research project looking at young people with early psychosis who had a dedicated lifestyle program of dietitians, exercise physiologists, and a clinical nurse consultant, which was Andrew at that time, and then and also having peer specialists as well working with the team. It was a 12-week program, and what we were able to demonstrate was that we were able to prevent anti-psychotic induced weight gain in the majority of people receiving this intervention. It wasn't a medication intervention, it was purely a 12-week lifestyle intervention. I want to mention Scott Teasdale, who's down the bottom of that slide, who's at that stage came to us as a newly minted dietitian. He was had never worked in mental health before, and he was part of the KBIM pilot. And he's gone on to achieve, he's a PhD and he's now a postdoc, and he's got an international reputation in nutrition for people living with psychosis. And this is really another example of people coming to join us in our team and then developing and going on, following their passion and interest, being enabled to do that, to really carve out their own niches of professional work. So I'm grateful to Scott as well. Our team expanded rapidly and our program expanded rapidly. We went from working just with young people with early psychosis to the adult programs. We did a staff intervention. We've done smoking cessation, sleep apnea, etc., etc. It's really gone on, and I won't have time to share all the details around that. But I do want to just comment on some of the key people who are now, they're still working with me, but they all worked in those earlier days in the Keeping the Body in Mind program. The roll call includes exercise physiologists Rachel Morell and Hamish Fibbins, who were responsible for the KBIM translational research and extension to other programs. Patrick Gould, who's been more recently with us and is now working also with Grant Sara, but is focusing on vaccine equity in people in our service and living with mental illness. Oscar Lederman, who's not pictured there, but who developed Headspace Active. So all of them have gone on to higher degrees, leading their own bodies of work and carving out respected professional niches. Throughout this time, we were also learning how to enact our values around lived experience by embedding consumer specialists within all our programs. So Catherine O'Donnell, who's there, we first worked with Catherine as part of the Keeping the Body in Mind program, but now she's actually the Director of Lived Experience at Mindgardens, where I now work. More on the program later of the extension. So the HEAL Declaration, the Healthy Active Lives Declaration, was developed by the iphYs group, was launched in 2013, and really this was a call to arms to try and have the assurance and the advocacy so that young people with psychosis have the same life expectancy and expectations of their life of their peers who don't have psychosis. We had a core working group and we had an amazing international advisory panel. We wrote to the key leaders at that time, this was 2012 say, to see whether they'd be happy to be an expert advisory group, and all of them wrote back and said yes straight away, so that was really fantastic. And it had a whole range of aspirational goals, and I won't go through the detail of that, but it's all publicly available. But it was really an advocacy piece and trying to make a difference for any person, young person experiencing psychosis for the first time. We managed to launch, we did an international launch of HEAL during the IEPA conference in Tokyo, and it's really gone on to have its own life as well. At that time, we had an accompanying Lancet Psychiatry commentary that David Shires and myself published, and the Lancet tweeted, you know, is this a new dawn for young people with psychosis? And hopefully that's what we were trying to create, a movement that would ensure that physical health was considered at the same time as mental health when someone comes into our service. We've gone on to multiple countries, multiple versions of the HEAL Declaration, and just sharing that this has been a big journey, a collaborative journey, and really important advocacy. The Keeping the Body in Mind program has done so many bigger things apart from just the clinical work it's actually intended for. It's developed a group of interested I suppose students, researchers, new programs, and expanded to a range of activities that have supported the broader aims of the Keeping the Body in Mind program. And moving along to Mindgardens, where I'm the Executive Director now, it's a collaboration between 4 organisations that's really trying to move forward with translational research to improve the lives of people with mental illness, neurological conditions and addictions. We've been able to, through the Keeping the Body in Mind Gardens program, expand further the work in the local health district, and that's been done through a range of programs. Again, I don't have time to share all of the details, but for example, we've expanded it to refugee and asylum-seeking populations. There's been the vaccine program that I mentioned earlier. There's lots that's gone on as a body of work. And as I've tried to, I suppose, allude to, it's gone beyond the clinical domain to research and implementation science, education, training, very much influencing policy and service provision as well as consumer co-production. I think I've shared this, but it's just to touch on the fact that the influence has been broad and unexpected from the beginning of when we started. This is one more example, New South Wales Health. This was Grant Sara's idea of using the national but New South Wales version of the Your Experience of Service, which all consumers receive in New South Wales, and actually adding the HEAL declaration components into the questions being asked for consumers to make sure this is embedded in practice as well. The New South Wales Health Guidelines have now also adapted and adopted a whole lot of the components, and again, don't just screen interveners in there. Consensus statements, guidelines for psychiatrists. It's created a mushroom of, I guess, interest, research, but more importantly, policy changes and practice changes. And hopefully most of you know about the Equally Well, the national organisation in Australia, which has also set about to do a national consensus statement, which was based on similar sort of ideas to the, and then New Zealand has one too, Equally Well, but similar ideas to the HEAL Declaration. This is what happened with the original cardiometabolic health algorithm. It's been translated into 8 different countries, lots of languages, people coming forward and asking if they could do this. So it's had a meaningful life, and the Leicester UK adaptation is embedded in the NICE guidelines as well. The HEAL Declaration similarly was translated widely, multiple languages, showing that there's an interest in this area, and just with some simple tools, people want to go and do the right thing and make changes. So we've had real interest in the collaborative network that we've been able to lead. We also got a huge amount of support and endorsement from that original launch of the HEAL Declaration in 2013. And that was significant for us to get so many different organisations right back then endorsing and saying, yes, we want to make a difference. The WHO got onto this late, but I was lucky enough to be involved in the 2018 publication and meetings around developing an actual guideline for managing people's mental health. And that's good that that's been done and now published, but I'm just giving you a flavour of how much the landscape has changed since then. We've developed a whole lot of consumer resources as well in that time, co-design with consumers, oral health, smoking cessation, etc. It's a big body of work. And just briefly, to go back from that original cardiometabolic health algorithm, which was only designed for the registrar workshop back in 2010, Mental Health Commission of New South Wales gave us a substantial amount of money to update them, and I'm giving you a sneak peek. This will be published online on our Mindgardens website shortly, but it hasn't seen the light of day as yet. But we've got a newly sort of finessed guideline with a whole lot of all the updated details, numbers. Back of it gives you how to screen, what to do, and we're aiming for a national implementation of this and rollout later this year. We've also developed a new tobacco treatment algorithm which will help guide clinicians on that front as well. I know that was a very fast tour of a whole lot of the work that has been done, but I'm coming back now to the view, and really my heartfelt thanks to all our staff, collaborators and partners in Partners in Crime. It's been quite a journey, as you can see. Most importantly, we've been able to support and develop the next generation of clinicians, translational researchers and peer wellness specialists. It is the energy and dedication and innovations of this group that gives me great hope for the future. I am exceptionally proud to be standing here today on behalf of all the wonderful people I've just introduced and more that I haven't been able to share all the details of because of time. And it's also an honour, the whole thing has been in honour of the consumers that we work with. And some final thoughts. All of us are individually responsible for the quality of care we give our patients, and that gives us a moral imperative to improve this care as much and as fast as we can. Our patients still die too early with preventable physical health conditions. This is a human rights scandal, and we need to stand with them. Also, public psychiatry is really rewarding and really important. I understand that there's a great drive to private practice, but it's public clinics with the more disadvantaged patients and overworked colleagues from multiple disciplines where you get to really drive positive change. So it's an administrative psychiatry, which you might call reform psychiatry, isn't something different from your day job. You don't have to choose it to do it. You just have to go where the data and your patient's experience takes you. And now back to some families. David Shires received an OBE in 2017, and this is a photo with David and his wife Anne and his daughter Mary at Buckingham Palace. David was asked at the time what drove him to do the work that he's done, and he replied that it's his daughter's the reason. 25 years ago, she was in an old asylum. She was very young at the time when she went in. There was no early intervention psychosis services and no treatment for people with physical health conditions. So she was in an older asylum, and today she's here in the ballroom of Buckingham Palace. And back to the original family. So Judy, on my right, my auntie, never got to meet her grandchildren. And amongst all of the other challenges of having schizophrenia, that's the impact of premature mortality. Whereas my mother and my uncle lived into their 80s, albeit with significant cardiovascular disease that needed treatment, but they were able to live a longer life as a result of effective care that was given to them that wasn't given to my auntie. This is the impact of premature mortality. A lot has changed in these years. These are my children more recently, pre-COVID, but in Budapest, where the first photos of the family were taken and where my family are from. So you can see there's been a long journey of growing up of our work, my family, and I think we all can do better for future generations in improving this health inequity. We can do this, we should do this, and we should do it all together. Thank you for listening, and thanks to all the wonderful people along the way.
Thank you for such an incredibly inspiring presentation. I'm sure we'll all take that away with us, what one individual can manage to do with that vision and that collaboration. Thank you again.